On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, we speak with Susan Sucher, Gilbert columnist, domestic Empress, and a speaker at this summer's Chesterton Conference in Minneapolis. Learn about the practical art of domesticity and localism in the home, and more on this episode of Uncommon Sense. Well, hello, viewers and listeners, and welcome back to Uncommon Sense. I am Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization and Mission here at the Society. I'm joined, as always, this week by my wonderful co-host, Gretelyn Darkey. Hi, Gretelyn.
Hi there, Joe.
And we are honored to have as a guest today one of our columnists for Gilbert magazine, to which if you don't subscribe, you should. Susan Sucher, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm so looking forward to seeing you both at the conference this year.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to seeing you at the conference. Let me just say that one of the memories that gets brought up most about last year's conference is your talk, and maybe we'll have a link in the description to where people can get a hold of that, because it really is worth revisiting in preparation. And if it doesn't make you excited to come to this year's conference, I don't know what will. So just a word of appreciation about your talk last year. It was so fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I was super honored and blessed to be able to share Chesterton's intervention and intercession in our life. He has completely transformed my vocation as a mother and a wife. And, whatever I can do to let people know about the wisdom that's out there in his writing, I am super happy to have the opportunity to do that. So thank you.
As a wife and a mom, it was very encouraging for me. So thank you. It was sometimes that side, I'm a working mom, but sometimes that side of the business can get tedious, and you helped me to see the adventure again. So thank you very much. I appreciated that.
It is a wild adventure, and no matter if you work outside the home or you don't, it's all for the home. Mm-hmm. The men are doing it for the home, the women are doing it for the home, and we need to keep that as the focus of our society, which is really what I'm excited to talk about again this year, because I think that sometimes we think the important thing is the job or the title or the paycheck, our role as a taxpayer and a consumer. And, that is not where it's at. And at the end of the day, that's not what we're taking with us. That's not what's going to remain. The love is going to remain, and that we find in the home. So we need to put the focus where we're at. And I think then that's where true happiness comes. So, and it's for all of us. I say domestic Empress, and that's more of a general term. I embrace it, but encourage other people to do that too. I'm not the domestic Empress. I'm a domestic Empress, and my husband's the king of our domain, and we rule together in concert, and it would be greatly diminished if it weren't the both of us, but I think we need to see that as something that has value. And I think sometimes in our culture, we see it as an also ran. We see it as an addition to what we are. What are you? I'm a named profession, and I'm also a mother of this many children, or I'm a father of this many children. But isn't that the most critical role that we play? And the one that has the most value to society is the family, and what we do. Even if we have no children, what do we do to support other families? What do we do to support other children? I think this is where society flourishes, and I'd love to see our society flourish.
Beautiful. Let's back up a little bit, and for those of our audience who don't know you, tell us a little bit about you and how many children you have, and a little bit of your story here.
Okay, well, I am a mom of 9. I have 7 boys and 2 girls, so it's a bit of a locker room around here sometimes. My husband and I moved to Maryland in May of 2020. I've been homeschooling for a long time, over 20 years, and I really enjoy the opportunity to be with my children, the opportunity to teach them directly. Before I stayed home, I was an actuary or actuarial student, because I didn't have my final credential yet. And that's where I met my husband. there was a lot of negotiating when we got together about what our life might look like together. I was very businesslike about the whole thing. But one thing I knew, I already had two children prior to meeting him. I had a bit of a detours in my very young adult life, which gave me two beautiful children. I was going to just stick with that. I was planning to work, never get married again. 40 years old, it'd be time to party as these kids left the house, and God apparently had other plans. So did my husband. But I told him, I said, I have these two children, and when I put them into daycare, for me, is painful to leave them sometimes with people who clearly didn't love them the way that I did. I said, I don't have to have any more children. I could, but I don't need to. But if I do, I will be home with them. That was just a prerequisite. And so I said, we're going to have to figure that out. And he was, he's an actuary, financially conservative man. And so he wasn't quite sure if that was going to work out, because I made a decent income, and 2 times X is better than 1 times X when you're talking just numbers, right? So I had to make him a spreadsheet, to show his projected increases, and I a little research on some articles about how when a wife stays home, it helps the husband's career because he doesn't have to take time off for sick visits, or, usually married couples with children split those. And so I said, this is going to help your career. We're going to have this quality of life. I won't have these expenses related to work. And, eventually he acquiesced. He replaced my income within 3 or 4 years through his own promotions and, God's provision in our lives. And we haven't looked back. I mean, it's challenging for him sometimes because his coworkers, he's in a highly paid profession. They're going on trips to the Bahamas, and that hasn't been in our, wheelhouse, which we get our own entertainment at home with all the kids. There's sacrifices and there's choices that have gone along with that decision. But I think that's again something that Chesterton has helped me to see clearly, that that the things that really matter aren't the trips to the Bahamas, and they aren't these material possessions that we can acquire. It's not about what car's in the driveway, and it's not about some of these extra luxuries we could enjoy if we were both working in the actuarial profession. Maybe we wouldn't have had baby number 9, or maybe who knows, but I can't imagine life without them, and they're worth more than anything money could ever buy. So I think Chesterton's pointed us in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's such an important and lovely witness, so necessary for our day and age, and quite fitting under God's plan of providence too. That in 2 ways, I would say. First, that Chesterton himself was childless in his marriage, a great cross that he and Frances bore together in their married life, but also that, I'll be a little controversial here. You're sort of brooking the trend in letting this guy mansplain, motherhood and wifehood to you, right? So maybe talk about that in a more direct way. That this is a man who's writing from the early 20th century. I could see even among my peers some women of goodwill, saying, well, I don't know what he would have to say to my situation, or how he could speak to what I'm experiencing, or what I need to do to realize my vocation in life. Maybe answer that concern that might come up.
Well, I want to start with my own conversion story to the Catholic faith, just a small portion of it. I had many objections. I was a young feminist. I was raised by a feminist. She was the only member of her high school class, my mother, who was not in the Future Homemakers of America. So she was very proud of that fact. She got a college degree. She ended up getting her master's degree. She's a very strong woman. And unfortunately for her, she raised a very strong woman who has completely different ideas about some things. but one of the things that really concerned me about the Catholic faith was that they were opposed to birth control. And I thought, who are these old celibate men to tell me what to do with my body? Just the very, and I was so offended. And I remember going to, this was before the internet was really what it is now. So I remember looking through the stacks at Carthage College, where I was enrolled in finishing my degree in math. And I found the encyclical on birth control that was written in 1960, which the name is escaping me right now. But is that Humani Generis?
Humani Vitae, right?
Humani Vitae. Okay,
Yeah.
so I pull it out and I'm like ready to be angry. This is it. I'm ditching RCIA. These guys. I'm gonna find it, the thing that's gonna just be the deal breaker for this whole Catholic thing. And I read it, and I was amazed to see that these old men respected me more than anybody in our culture has ever respected me, exactly the way that I am. I didn't need a pill to make me acceptable to a man, to somehow turn off part of me that was like wild and terrifying and big and strong and differentiated me from men. I mean, we are creatures that can create within ourselves, in cooperation with God, like human life. This is a superpower that men can only sit back and look at in awe and say, wow, and I felt like this man, the church understood that in a way that I was getting sold a bill of goods. Like, so it's really better for me to take a pill so I can be more like a man, so that I can earn an income and not be bothered with children. But wait a second, children, I have a couple children, and I like them. And so this is actually like a good thing. Kids are a good thing. So I just, the veil was being torn from my eyes. I was like, wait a second, they must know something. And then it was women's ordination. I'm like, oh my gosh, that they were right on that one too. And eventually, the more I read, Malaris Dignitatum, I kept reading what the church had to say about women. And I said, you know what? The things I don't completely understand, they've been right about everything else. So I'm just going to go ahead and like acquiesce, like I will give my fiat to the rest of it, because they've so clearly defended all of these positions. So that was the church. So Chesterton's just another old guy, right? So the fact that he's an old guy, it's not, that has really no bearing on whether or not what he says is true. So what I'm looking for is truth. I'm a truth seeker. That's my whole goal is, and so I don't really care what the source is. What I've found when I've applied the truth that Chesterton relays in his writing to my life is freedom and joy and peace. So if I were to reject that solely because it came out of his pen, I mean, I think that would be a foolish decision. So I think that's really the key. I think the key is that we need to look at the message and not reject something just because the messenger may be the wrong sex, or be writing in a different century. Truth is universal. Truth doesn't, it doesn't depend on who's saying it. And I think we need to completely reject that. I mean, that's part of what this identity politics and some of this new thinking is that it's all relative, or it matters who's saying it. And no, if I speak the truth, it should be, you should be able to hear it, even if you don't like that it's coming from me because of my external characteristics. That's not.
It's actually
It's still true.
quite prejudiced to reject someone just because of their external characteristics. So.
Right. So I reject that whole paradigm. I'm just not going to. I'm not going to. I'm going to seek the truth, and where I find it, that's where I find it. And in Chesterton, I just see so much truth, and I see it. Maybe it helps that he was a great intellectual, and maybe it helps that, people respect what he has to say. But what really helps is that he lays it out straight. He does it with a good dose of humor, and he's consistent. In the same way I found consistency in the teachings of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, I find consistency in his writing. And no matter what he's writing about, people talk about the spirituality of GKC. Does he have a spirituality? Does he not? I'm saying well, if you've read enough of him, I mean, it's just pouring out of every essay, regardless of the topic. And I think that that you'd be blind not to see it if you really took an honest delve into his works. And so I'm particularly fascinated with his writing on economics because I do see a lot of spirituality in there. And I think sometimes we gloss over it, or I've seen people accuse him of being too poetic, which is sort of maybe it's definitely a derogatory, used in a derogatory fashion. But I think if we try to implement localism without looking at the spiritual side of things, we will completely fail. And I think it's a valuable enough idea. It's something that we really need. It's something that a lot of people don't know that we need, but we need to be able to clearly articulate that message. So I'm going to do a feeble attempt of that at the conference, but that's my goal, because I think then we're going to find some liberation, and we're going to find uh, some freedom and joy, and get ourselves a little closer to the truth. That's
Amen.
all. That's my goal for the talk.
Beautiful.
Just a little.
just a little hardcore truth, you know. I love it. No, and I think it's funny that his being poetic is a criticism, because I found I'm more of the poetry and literature side of things. I do not do math, sadly. But just finding the poetry in the everyday, I think, is so valuable, and it really shows. Because it's easy to say, here's the statistical reasons why it's better to do localism, and that's good, and we need that. But then there's a point where you have to like talk to the heart, and that's where you get like the Napoleon of Notting Hill, and these ideas that like your town or your street even is where it's at, and that's your home that you defend and you fight for. And if people aren't willing to fight for their home, their street, their town, they're just going to give into this globalistic mentality that's really been quite destructive to the family, to the faith, to all these things that we hold dear.
Well, Chesterton starts in that mode, I think. We've been talking recently here on the podcast and in my local Chesterton Society and in the Chesterton community more broadly about St. Francis of Assisi, the book, because we are going to be celebrating its anniversary. And what he observes of Francis there is true of himself. He says, if you're looking at the figure of St. Francis, you can't understand it unless you understand his actions as that of a man wildly in love. He's a lover, and it is what he loves that motivates him, and that makes sense of all his deeds that seem contradictory. How is this man who praises Brother Fire rolling around in the snow? It's because these are the kinds of seemingly erratic vicissitudes of action that you might see in a young man who's just head over heels, literally somersaulting in love with his beloved. And Chesterton starts the same way. He appeals to the heart. And I guess in our modern sentimental pathos-ridden age, there's good reason that we maybe find ourselves instinctively distrustful of that. But at the same time, I would say it's an indispensable form of argumentation for these ideas of distributism and just social economic order that Chesterton and the Church propound. And one concrete example I'll just pull from Twitter this very morning as we're recording this podcast. I saw a guy posting a slew of these wonderfully created, very appealing, visually stunning logos for companies that were all generated using AI. And he said, this is where artists and things are going to find their careers going away because AI is going to take over this sector. And I would challenge anybody to come up with a rationalistic laws of the market and of supply and demand reason that shouldn't be the case. But I can think of other kinds of reasons that maybe don't fit into that paradigm. Just the good of giving a man a job, even though he does it less good than a machine does, less well than a machine does. But that's not an argument that could be fit into the rationale of modern corporate capitalism. And so I think you do well to recover that angle of argumentation.
And I think for you, I don't know, Susan, but your passion definitely shines through, and
Yeah.
it's a big evangelizer. So thank you for that.
Well, and that's part of the point too, right? So I was actually I'm blessed to be part of the ordinariate. So I was sitting down on my pastor's back porch talking to Bishop Lopes yesterday, and he's talking about just that very simple idea we have in the Catholic Church: the bishops equip the priests equip the laity, but it's truly the laity's job to evangelize. And this is one area I think that we have a lot of room to improve. Is in teaching on the social justice or the economic ideas within the Catholic Church, the principle of subsidiarity. I think we could do a better job of that. And I really want in the talk to go beyond consumer behavior and employment, because I feel like we give a lot of, a, a lot of attention to that. And yes, I could go buy a local brew. It would be better for me to have a local beer than to buy, a big name brand that's but there's more than that, because I think that that's something that politicians try to make us do. They reduce us to consumers, and they reduce us to taxpayers. And that's really all we are. They want to incentivize us. They give us tax credits, or they ship off some of our own money back to us, and then we're supposed to think they're great. And that's how they relate to us. Even after 9/11, Bush gave a talk about how we needed to come together as a nation, and I thought, oh, he's going to pull out some JFK and tell me that I need to do something for my neighbor, or I've got to volunteer, I should and what he said was to keep traveling and spending money, and that's how we get back at those terrorists. And I'm like, what? No, no. When I think of America, when I think of the ideals of like my homeland, I think of families, and I think of communities, and I think of of a cultural day in my elementary school, and somebody brought the lumpia, and somebody brought the guamkis, and there was some tamales, and we all got together and we enjoyed each other's company, and we celebrated each other's differences, and we were America. I mean, it was beautiful. This was, and so I don't think of going to Walmart when I celebrate what it is to be an American, when I celebrate what it is to be in this great cultural experiment that is our country. And I think we need to fight back, and we need to say we are not just consumers, and we are not just taxpayers, because what I'm doing is terrible in the eyes of someone who's trying to collect revenue, right? I produce all of this untaxable work. I do the work of the babysitter, I do the work of the school teacher, I do the work of the administrator, I do the work of the social worker and the counselor, and I'm depriving all of these people of taxable revenue, which is how the government really sees it. And I don't want to be too dark on that, but I know that what I do can produce great economic value, and can produce great value to the loved ones in my life and to my community. And I want to encourage other people to find ways to do that, even if they also make money. We need it. This is not, I'm not saying that it's evil. I'm saying that, that we have other opportunities. They're trying to anesthetize us in a way. We've all got one of these little devices, and we're plugged in to the matrix in a way. We got our soma. We're kind of and 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 we need to reevaluate what's really important and what is really going to give us pleasure. It's not one more app or one more game or another distraction. There are real people in our communities. There are real people who need attention, who need love. They're in our families, they're our next door neighbors. So we need to find ways to reach out to them and to value those things. You know, could it be a nature hike club where we're walking in the woods? Could it be a poetry recitation? Could it be a block party? Could it be a local Chesterton society that you host in your home and you invite everybody to come, your neighbors, your fellow parishioners? I mean, ours is great. We have rocket scientists, we have homemakers, we've got firefighters, we've got agnostic neighbor, we have so many wonderful people that come and share. Some I think come for the company, and some come for the Chesterton, and it's all great. These are things that concrete things we can do.
Something that I don't know why this. Well, it follows. It might seem non sequitur, but it does follow. But I was struck by a memory in my own life. In some of what you were saying, I can't remember many toys that I received as a kid, like gifts, or that I purchased with my paperboy money or anything like that. But I I have this very, very concrete and fond memory of how excited I was as a little kid the day I realized or learned from, I think my mom filled me in on this great secret that had been kept from me up until then, that I could walk up to the corner hardware store on recycling day and get a refrigerator box, and,
Yep.
and I think that's what Chesterton means by the adventure of thrift. Not only is it the case that
Yes.
that the new thing isn't going to satisfy you, but we lose in a double way. We lose also because of what getting that new thing deprives you of. It deprives you of the adventure of doing without it, of finding ways to make a cardboard box into a toy, or into a play place.
Yes, and Chesterton lived that by his own example. He'd invite children to his home. They'd put on the Christmas shows. I mean, he knew how to have that type of fun.
Yep.
And he describes it in the wildness of domesticity. He describes, we can have a picnic on the floor. We can do whatever we want. We have this freedom that they can't take from us.
Yeah.
He says, whether you're under a sultan or St. Louis, certain things remain the same. And those are those domestic things. So we need to reclaim that freedom and acknowledge what we have, this beautiful despotic realm where we can do what we want and we can create it the way it needs to be for our own families. And part of that involves turning off these outside images of what domesticity looks like. I am not Donna Reed. I am not.
Thank God.
I do not qualify for Pinterest. Some days I'm climbing over the piles to get to the kids because we've had to, leave to go help a family member who had a medical emergency, or we've had to focus on somebody's outside interests. My son's into fishing, so maybe we forget some other things for a while and we buy him the fly tying kit and we focus on, so I'm not encouraging squalor necessarily in the home, but I am saying that, what domesticity looks like, what being a homemaker looks like can vary wildly, and it can vary based on your stage in life. I see so many moms that have just littles, and then they don't understand why their home doesn't look immaculate like a museum. They feel like they see this outside view of how things should be, and they end up with depression. They end up feeling like a failure. They end up with even marital problems because the expectations are completely unrealistic, and we need to stop doing that to ourselves. I think women do it to their own selves, and I think culture kind of supports that. And what I see in Chesterton is he's saying, this is your little Garden of Eden. This is your home. You can create what you need for your family, and it is going to be very individual. This is the ultimate local in localism, is the family. And so your family will not be like any other family, and that is exactly as it was intended. So stop comparing. And then, part of the problem with this whole idea, though, is I think it's predicated on a great prayer life, because that confidence in being able to accept where you are and how you are fulfilling God's plan is actually having a conversation about it with him once in a while. And I think sometimes we listen to other voices instead of listening to what God's telling us to do with our own families. And I think if we did, we'd feel a lot more confident. And if we tuned out the other voices and just spent a little time listening to what he has to say about that. And I think that's where a lot of his individuality, Chesterton's, that's sort of rooted in that relationship with God. So he doesn't always explicitly say it, but I feel it's this undercurrent in his writing, that is where it's the relationship with the creator. It's this individual idea that, God created us. He created mankind, but he created man individually too. You are a unique creation of God, and he wants you to be happy here and in heaven with him. And, one of the ways to do that is to quit listening to what, in Babies in Distributism, he calls it the vulgar taste of the vulgar millionaires. Like we don't want to be dictated to what is valuable. What is valuable is the things that can't be bought. So if we reprioritize that, the economics follows, and economic decisions are moral decisions. So there's no excuse. You can't just say, oh, it's numbers. It's not numbers. It's all moral decisions. What do you value? What's more important? Do you care about how your phone or your electric car battery is being produced, where the materials are coming from? And if you do, what are you going to do about it? This is a decision I struggle with. I have an iPhone. I have, we all have needs for technology. We live in the world, but I think that looking at things from Chesterton's perspective, even though he lived before some of these issues came about, will help us to align our values and then create more peace. And does it matter that it's not, like Bishop Lopes was talking, that, well, the bishops could all say something about abortion, or they could all say something very large and make a big statement, and it wouldn't do any good. It needs to be the people. So yes, you just have one family, and I just have one family, and we've got our local communities, but we can't discount the value of grassroots, doing things ourselves, and then being that light to other people who might see what's happening and see the joy we have, and want to know about it. And then things can spread. This is not going to be a top down thing. There's no way that you can enforce it's such an oxymoron anyway, but how could the principle of subsidiarity be enforced top down? That's
Yeah.
that's,
I always kind of laugh too when I hear, the enemies of the church say things like, well, the popes are controlling this and that. I'm like, you think they have any control?
I can't even control my own
That'd
children.
be nice.
You think
Yeah.
If what the Pope said actually trickled down, that'd be great. That'd be awesome. Yeah, but it's beautiful. And I think, you say you have your family, I have my family. But I was just thinking about what you were saying about your local Chesterton Society, and mine is similar. I'm sure, Joe, yours is probably similar. It's all types, right? But the thing we have in common is the way this guy expressed the truth. And he had it rightly ordered. And even people who don't have the fullness of truth in the faith can see that, and they understand that, and they're drawn to that. So it's interesting. It's like you only need a certain amount of common denominator to make this work. And sort of magically and, probably spiritually, wonderfully, Chesterton is that person for a lot of us. But yeah, it's interesting that how easily we're divided when we listen to those wrong voices, but how wonderfully we're united when we listen to the right voices.
Yeah, and Chesterton in What's Wrong with the World at the beginning, he talks about the medical mistake, and he points out there that the ideal always has to come first. Progress, if progress can mean anything, has to mean progress toward some fixed point, some goal or object that we're achieving. And this relates to what Susan was saying earlier, that ideal, we have it. We've been told it. We know it. We also just know it because it's written on our hearts in certain ways. And where we're definitely not going to find it is in the changes of the world. And even if people feel, Susan, you like myself, we talk about this a lot to a lot of people, and I'm sure you get as often as I do, well, we're never going to change society. This society is. I'll sometimes grant that. I'll allow that and say, okay, point, you're not going to change society, but at the very least, don't follow society. Like that's a whole separate step. You can admit that you're not going to change it by being countercultural, but that still doesn't give you justification. Just blindly follow the culture.
I
You know?
agree. There's a principle in psychology that, anxiety is caused when your locus of concern exceeds your locus of control.
Yep.
Okay. So I can affect myself. I can influence my children's behavior, although I cannot control it, right? So I need to focus where my efforts matter and where they mean something. I'll cast my ballot and then I'll leave it alone because, I don't want to drive myself crazy. I haven't watched news in over a decade because why? I find more truth in an essay of Chesterton's than I do on any of the networks. I endorse none of them. So I think that we need to recognize that no, we're not in control of all of it. There is someone who's in control of all of it. It's God. And we need to trust, and then we need to do what we can do. And what we can do is right here. But those things that we do matter. They matter on a spiritual level, they matter on a material level. The choices that we make to support a local business person, the choices that we make to visit a neighbor, the choices that we make to advocate for people with disabilities, the choices that we make to anything that we do, these things matter. And we need to be faithful, and then we need to trust God with the consequences, or trust God with the results. I mean, Mother Teresa talked about that, and I think that that's a really valuable way to look at things. And I think that what we're responsible for is properly forming our conscience, properly forming our philosophy of life. I think Chesterton's a great tool, mechanism to be able to do that, to get us asking the right questions, and then to be able to reorder our values. I I mean, when I first stayed home with my kids, I knew I was doing the right thing, but I was just sometimes weep because I mean, literally weep, sobbing because I lost the recognition. I lost the bonuses. I lost the clean clothes. I mean, there were so many benefits and so many kudos, external motivators to working outside the home. And, um, and I would get people who would say, like, aren't you wasting your education? What are you doing? You're not doing anything. You're not working, just these little jabs. And until I really got a strong foundation of the value of that was kind of intrinsic, internalized, I allowed those things to really steal my joy. And so if we can reorder our thinking by meditating on what's most important, by even with a sense of humor, like, oh, so I left being dictated at home to be dictated by the, as a secretary, like, yeah, really, like, why is my work less valuable because I don't get paid? Like, is that really all I value? I only value things that you pay money for, or when somebody gets paid for something, that's the only work that has value. And I mean, that just can't be. They can't they can't be. And I think it's a very reductive way to look at people, but I think that's what our culture does. That's what it trains us to do. When they teach children about economics in school, they call it consumer economics because you're a consumer. That's all you are. You're a consumer. Like, how will I consume? I will write checks. I will use credit cards. I will, and you learn all the ways to get a loan, write a check, pay your credit card bills. So that's not,
That's not
that's not
even
who
like
we are.
good money management.
No, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
usury, it's the way of the
Yeah.
future, like, go for it. You have to get all of these loans. You have to be in debt. You have to be in debt to go to college. I mean, this is how we're trained, and it's a slavery. But freedom's found in valuing things that don't cost any money. So if I can be happy, praying a rosary, if I can be happy reading some Chesterton, which I can find, 90% of it, and it's in the public domain. I don't even have to buy a book. If I can be happy going for a walk in the woods, at the places they don't charge admission, then really I'm outside of that system. It's a little bit dangerous, right? Isn't it a little bit dangerous to not be dependent on that system? Because how do they control me if they can't take anything away from me? If I'm growing my food in the backyard, if I'm going for a hike, if I don't have pleasure in some of these things, maybe some of these issues aren't even an issue. What do you need social credit for if you don't want anything they're selling?
Yeah.
So
right.
so maybe we can challenge that system a little bit by just parking ourselves outside of it to the extent that we can. I'm not living in la la land. I know there's a reality. I know there's certain constraints, but I think we're less imprisoned by things than we think we are, and sometimes our chains are in our mind. I thought that at one point I had to put my children on the school bus every day because that's how I was raised. So I just did. I put them on the bus every day, and then things became intolerable with regard to my own rights to even visit them at school. And there were certain things I just, I was like, this isn't right. I gave birth to these children and I can't go see their classroom. I don't like that. And so one day they didn't go on the bus, and nothing changed, right? Like there was no sirens, alarms. We just started homeschooling, and it's like, oh, this giant paradigm shift. Like everything changed, and the only thing that really changed was me. I just said, oh, I'm going to opt out of that situation, and I did, and it was an amazing thing, and I realized how much power I had that I didn't even know that I had, and that nobody could really control. You see what I'm saying? But I just had to change my own thinking about things. So there's still a lot that I have to explore, and a lot of things that I'm sure that I've shackled myself to that I need to just reevaluate. So I think you have to constantly look at these things in your own life. And but I want Chesterton to be personal. Chesterton's cool to read, and if you read Chesterton, people are like, oh, that's a neat thing, or he was really smart, or do you smoke cigars too, or there's like a certain, like, I don't mind a good cigar with my dad every now and then, but I think Chesterton matters most when he changes us, when we really internalize what's going on. It's great to have a good discussion, and it's great to think about intellectual things and chew on them. Of course, many people enjoy that, but the real value in Chesterton comes when we allow his spirituality, when we allow his philosophy, when we allow his views on life to really fundamentally change our underlying assumptions about how the way the world is and how the way the world could be, and we don't need a new president to be able to make that happen. This isn't going to be up to the Congress whether or not we can implement these things in our own lives. We can do this, like he said, we can do this under the Sultan or St. Louis. It doesn't matter,
and we've had a savior. We don't need to elect one.
Yeah, I mean, and we won't.
Yeah.
We won't
right.
find it in the medical field. We won't find it in the political field. We will not find our savior anywhere but where he already is, and that's the everlasting man. And Chesterton wrote a great book about that. So we don't need anything more than that. We need to conform ourselves to that everlasting man through our decisions and through our lives. And I think Chesterton's a great one to help lead us on that path.
Amen.
Amen indeed. Well, I think that basically brings us up against our time limit for this episode, but I think this was an adequate teaser for the kind of content you might hear if you come to the conference and attend Susan's session and hear what she has to say, and also the conference in large, right? Because I think you'll find that this is one of those places that can truly change your life, one of those encounters with the truth, with the joy that comes from living in the truth, that could potentially, set you off on a new and exciting, adventurous path that you never imagined to find yourself on. So, Susan, I'd just like to thank you again for being on the program. Any last words of wisdom for our audience?
Well, I'm gonna end with a quote. It's from The Sanity of the Family. So when Chesterton talks about sanity, he's talking about his economic theory. He wrote a book called The Outline of Sanity. And he says, We shall never return to social sanity till we begin at the beginning. We must start where all history starts, with a man and a woman and a child, and with the province of liberty and property which these need for their full humanity.
Beautiful.
Little something to think about.
It's a good place to start. Yeah, and it is where all things start. So thank you. Thanks once again.
Mm-hmm.
And Gretelyn, thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
And to all of you viewing or listening, please give us that like, give us that subscribe, share this with your friends, invite them to become listeners of UncommonSense, invite them to join you either digitally or in person at the conference this year. You can learn more about that at chesterton.org/conference. And perhaps, try to take some of the ideas that you've heard on the show today and bring those up and discuss those with your friends, because you might find that it proves for fruitful discussion. We at least find that discussing Chesterton with friends is always better. So until next time, thank you once again from me, Joe Grabowski, and the team here at UncommonSense. God bless.